And now the 45-minute devotional. Now, wasn't that excellent? It's very good to hear from you, brother, and from the church, about the church at Del Mar and the work down there. Very encouraging. Let's go to the 16th chapter of Genesis for just a little bit. And when we take a look at what is written here, I was thinking maybe I could kind of turn this into an assignment, and I'll let you know what I'm thinking regarding that here in a little bit. An assignment for the rest of the week, especially since this is Thanksgiving week. But for us, every week ought to be Thanksgiving week, should it not? I think Dwayne was saying something to that effect this morning. At any rate, in Genesis chapter 16, it says verse 1, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go in to my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. After Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. That's almost a parenthetical statement, because 10 years earlier, God had made the promise to Abram, I'm going to give you a child. So how old is that promise? It's a 10-year-old promise. In other words, 10 years earlier, God had made the promise, and the promise had not come to pass. And it may well be that Sarai was getting a little anxious for that promise to come to pass. By the way, how long would it be from this point after 10 years? How much longer would it be until that promise would be fulfilled? 15 more years, 25 years total from the time of the promise. How old was Abraham when the promise was made? If you recall, he was 75 when the promise was made. How old was Sarai when the promise was made? She was 65. So she's 65 hearing this promise of her going to have a child. And of course we know that she laughs about that, which will result in the name of the child eventually being Isaac. He laughs. So that's where we are. This is 10 years into that promise, 15 more years to come. However, God did not send them a note that's saying, by the way, it'll be 25 years. He just said, I'm promising you a son, and it will come. But after 10 years, perhaps they were wondering. So Sarai says, take my handmaid. It was a different day. We don't do things like that today. It was a different time then, but Abraham said, all right. And so Hagar conceived the child through Abram. Let's go to verse 4. He went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight. No more extra information here why Hagar thought that, but it's kind of like, I have a child now, and you couldn't get a child. All these years you couldn't have a child. Maybe God loves me more than... Who knows what Hagar was thinking? But because she conceived a child, she now looks upon Sarai, her mistress, with despite. So Sarai said to Abram in verse 5, May the wrong done me be upon you. Now, here's where as a husband I go, wait a minute. Am I understanding what's happened? She comes to him and says, all right, we haven't had a child. Here, you take Hagar. And he says, okay, it's your idea. And they conceive a child together, and now Sarai's upset. But why is Sarai upset? Because she's been despised in Hagar's eyes. See, family problems are nothing new. They got issues. Abram said to Sarai, verse 6, Behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. So Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. So Hagar has been treated so poorly that she fled. But why is she being treated poorly? Because she treated Sarai poorly. It's like tit for tat, as we might say today. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That's the law, isn't it? And we see how that's worked out. So she's fled from her presence. It says in verse 7, however, now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority. Yes, I know you've despised her and you've treated her poorly, and now she's treated you poorly, so poorly that you fled. But I'm telling you, you go back and you submit to her. That's what the angel says. But that's not all he says. Look what he says in verse 10. I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are with child, and you will bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. Now in your margin, do you see a definition for the name Ishmael? What does the name Ishmael mean? It means God hears. It means God hears. I don't know if Hagar prayed. I don't know if Hagar lifted up her voice to the Lord. But I do know that when God gave this child a name, it was in response to Hagar's situation. And he was saying to her through the name of this child, the future name of this child, I hear. I see what's going on. And he finished out that statement. You shall call his name Ishmael because the Lord has done what? He has given heed to your affliction. You have any afflictions? You get any problems? You get any issues? This isn't some unique, unusual situation for just this one person, Hagar, the Egyptian maid. No, this is the way God works all the time. He hears. We're not done yet. The angel continues with his prophecy about Ishmael, the one named God hears. Said he'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will live to the east of all his brothers. And then, hearing this, she calls the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God who sees. If you look to the margin, you'll see the Hebrew word that's translated, you are a God who sees. It's El Roi. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it the way the Hebrews would have, but that's the way it's written in English. But that's what it means, a God who sees. Ishmael means he hears. El Roi means he sees. God hears, God sees. And think about who Hagar was. She wasn't even Jewish. She was an Egyptian. By the way, were there any Jews at this point? Abram was the progenitor of the Jewish race. He's the one who would produce the child, Isaac, who would have the son, who would have the sons, who would be the Jews. So this woman's an Egyptian. She's a maid in a home, and she's despised her mistress, and her mistress has despised her. There's animosity, there's hatred, there's difficulty in the house. She has gone away. She's out in the middle of the wilderness, and it is a wilderness. You look at the map, you look at the topographical map, you get on Google Earth, and you look at that place. This is a pretty harsh place. And yet God hears, and God sees. And you and I, we think sometimes, I know we do, I know we think like this. We think, I'm insignificant. I don't mean much. I don't matter much. How could God see me here in my little part of the world? But he sees. He sees and he hears and he knows and he responds. That lesson this morning about grace. Why did God send Jesus? Because he hears and because he sees. What's going on with the church in Haiti? Not just the church at Del Mar, but every congregation. What's going on with every congregation here? What's going on with every congregation of the Lord's people all over the earth? You and I may not know, but God hears, and God sees, and God takes it all in, and he's working all the time. And his plan is always a good one. Well, this is enough for tonight, but I want to challenge you with this. Go to chapter 21 and you see this almost the same thing happening again. Now Hagar has a 14-year-old boy. And she flees off or is sent off into the wilderness. And there's water in the plan there as well as there was water here. But we don't have time to go into all of that. But I want you to think through this week, as we're giving thanks, about all the times in your life that you can look back on and you can think about where you were praying hard just to make it through a certain situation, a certain circumstance, and you were struggling, you were having difficulty, but God saw you and God heard you and God brought you through. He's done it for me 1,000,000 times. I think about those times, and they were heartbreaking, and I was struggling. But here I am today. I think I've told you this before. My dad died when he was 49, so I always had this idea in mind growing up, I'll make it to 49 maybe. And here I am. You know how old I am today? I'm not to my birthday, but I'm 66. And I'm telling you this too, if God had given me a ladder at the beginning of my life saying, here's a list of all the difficulties you're going to face in life, I would have shot myself right then. And you would have done the same. But through all these difficulties, through all these difficult situations, not only has God seen me and heard me, he's brought me through, he's seen you, he's heard you, he's brought you through, and this week we're giving thanks, and you know as well as I do, we got a ton of stuff to give thanks for. And so in this world, with all the difficulty, with all the hardship, with gangs trying to rule the streets in a town where we have beloved brethren who we worry about, where children need to go to school but they can't go to school, where there are orphanages who need our support and churches that need our support. In this world, with all of this darkness and sin, there is still victory in Jesus Christ. And our lives mean something. Why do they mean something? Because God hears and he sees. And based on what he sees and hears, he provides for you and me every day so we can do what his son taught us to do. We can be lights in a world of darkness. We can be salt in this tasteless environment. We can be like cities on hills that people would look to and say, we need to get there, we need to go there. There's sustenance there. There's a place where we can eat. There's water for our animals and ourselves. There's shelter. There's law and order. That's what a city would mean to people who were traveling. You remember that guy traveling on the road that the Samaritan found? If he'd have made it to a city on a hill, he would have been all right. But he was caught out in the wilderness. And where did that Samaritan take him? He took him to a place where he could be cared for. That's us. We are the place where people can be loved. We're the place where people can be accepted. Because God has heard us and God has seen us. We can in turn see and hear others and reach out to them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So thank you, brother, for coming to us tonight. Thank you for your decision. I know it had to be scary to get up in front of a bunch of strangers and talk, but we appreciate you coming. Thank you, Paul, for seeing the opportunity and grabbing it up for us. So it's been great to be here tonight. I really appreciate it. We're going to sing a song of encouragement and invitation. If you know that God has seen and heard you where you are and you need to respond to him tonight, that's what this song is for. Whether to obey the gospel, to learn more about the gospel, to get the prayers of the church, that's what this song is for. We're inviting you to respond now while we stand and sing together.